So I'm trying something different today. I wanted to bring you a live recording of the Sustainable Packaging Show podcast. For those of you who don't know, that is my podcast where I talk about sustainable packaging, everything we need to know to make sustainable packaging the norm. Today's episode is going to be definitions you need to know. I'll link to the podcast as well in the comments. But hope you enjoy the show, and I'm going to try to keep this one short so we can post the video on LinkedIn because I think the max is 10 minutes. So I got my notes here, so I might lose eye contact with you every so often, but hope you enjoy the show. All right, welcome back to the Sustainable Packaging Show. Thanks for tuning in again today. We're going to talk today about 7 definitions you need to know before our journey begins. Our journey, which you all know, to make sustainable packaging the norm. And that's going to happen. 2023 is going to be a major year where that happens. And there's certain terms that need to be known before we can officially begin. I think sometimes in the world of sustainability, it gets very confusing. There's hundreds of terms. No one knows what they mean. And I want to simplify it to the 7 you really need to know, number 1, and do it in terms that are easy to understand so that we can unlock everyone's mind towards solving all of these issues, and that it's not just a select few that can participate. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in. The first term is LCA. LCA. So LCA is short for Life Cycle Assessment. And in simple terms, which I'm going to try to do in this video, it's the idea that there's many factors to weigh to evaluate whether something's sustainable. So a lot of us are looking for this black or white, yes or no, is it sustainable? And I'm going to be getting into that in future episodes, that it's better to focus on the impact, the positive and negative impacts being made by choosing that packaging. I think for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So I think by choosing the sustainable package, what's the reaction? I think it's a better, clearer way to look at things. We're going to talk about that in future episodes. But just to give an idea of LCA, so factoring everything that goes into the production of a product can factor into the LCA. So as an example, suppose you select a new sustainable packaging option. It composts into nothing. There's no impact on the climate, no carbon emissions, just the most perfect package in the world. However, to get the raw material to make that packaging, you completely destroy all the wildlife on Earth, right? Just to use an extreme example. That's not sustainable because you look at all the factors, not just say the packaging in this example. So that's the idea of LCA, life cycle assessment. You look at energy consumptions and emissions throughout the whole process. This is a term that's going to come up. You want to know it. LCA, life cycle assessment. Number 2, beginning of life. In simple terms, beginning of life in the world of packaging is where it comes from. So if you think of hemp packaging, the beginning of life, we're talking about a story of how that hemp is grown and the effects on the planet. Actually, in hemp's case, it's very positive, right? It's sequestering carbon, and there's many, soil regeneration, there's many benefits. So beginning of life, we're talking about where it comes from. Some people say BOL. You don't see that a ton, but beginning of life is where something comes from. This can include both the sourcing of the raw material and the environmental effects caused by sourcing that raw material. So you want to have a strong beginning of life, not just a strong end of life, as that example I told you a minute ago. All right, hope you're with me so far. The next is end of life, which I just alluded to. End of life is where the packaging or the product goes when the consumer's done with it. What's the end of life? Is it to be recycled? Is it to be reused? Is it to be composted? So that's what end of life, sometimes short for EOL. And one concept that I don't hear a lot talked about, but I think it's important, is to think about ideal end of life versus less ideal end of life. Some people say, oh, my packaging is recyclable, that's the end of life. Well, that's great, and that's the ideal end of life, but we should still consider what happens if the less ideal end of life happens. If it gets thrown in the ocean, what then will happen? So, as an example, the plastics industry boasts the ideal end of life for plastics. They're recyclable, 100% recyclable. You can make new products from it. It's so great, but no one looks at the less ideal end of life. And we're not perfectionists here either. I understand that there's always trade-offs with sustainability, but you want to see the big picture, then make your decision. Next up, term number four, industrial compostable. So to call something compostable, there's a certain standard that needs to be met. There's an ASTM standard, D6400. That's a test method to evaluate composting of plastic packaging, or frankly, it's of stuff that looks like plastic, because petroleum plastic is not going to be compostable. So to call something compostable, you need a study to back it up. So in simple terms, I'm going to give you the scientific definition. To be compostable is the following. 90% of the material must break down into these very small pieces, which they quantify, but that's less important for us, within 180 days with no toxins or heavy metals left behind. So we talk about, and I'm going to get into it in a second, compostable and biodegradable. We mix those terms together, but really compostable has a definite definition, a precise definition that needs to be met in order for you to call something compostable. There's a test method also. Okay, this is the test method for industrial composting. There's also something called commercial composting. Actually, excuse me, that's a synonym. So some people call it industrial composting, some people call it commercial. This is going to a facility for composting. Next up is home compostable. So home composting uses a similar test method, but it's tailored not for a giant plant that's going to process the compostable plastics or the compostable biopolymer, but rather for your backyard compost. So they give it a little bit more time. They don't account for the high temperatures, right? Those facilities get to extremely high temperatures to try to accelerate the rate of composting. Obviously, you don't have that in your backyard compost. So there's an ISO standard that requires 90% of the material to break down within 1 year without heavy metals. And there's actually a couple ISO standards that are used in order to pass the home compostability testing. So closely related, home and industrial compostable, but slightly different. And the way that these, for those of you who care, like ASTM, ISO, they set up test methods saying, here's what you need to do to see if you are compostable. And then there are, let's just say, organizations, TÜV, BPI, that will then certify those results to give you that stamp that you can put on your packaging. All right, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. We're going to keep it moving along. Next up is biodegradable. Here it is, the big term, biodegradable. The term's widely used, but here's the controversy with the term and why you should be careful using the term. Everything is eventually biodegradable. So what are you actually saying when you say something's biodegradable? You know, this laptop is technically biodegradable. This microphone is biodegradable eventually. So unlike compostable, where it says to be compostable, 90% needs to break down within a year, or 90% needs to break down within 180 days without toxins, there's a definition. Biodegradable does not have such a definition, and it can be thrown around loosely. It's been banned in certain states, and one of the reasons it's banned is because you put biodegradable on a package. Maybe that consumer just litters it because they don't take it seriously. So be careful of that term biodegradable, and keep in mind that does not have a finite definition. And last but not least, PCR, also known as post-consumer recycled content. That means you put something in the blue bin as a consumer. It goes to a MRF, which is a material recovery facility. These are details you don't necessarily need to know, but if you want to know them, great. That material then gets sold to a manufacturer like Contempla Specialty Packaging, who will then reuse that material in their products. So that's post-consumer recycled. You see this is a common sustainability angle. PCR. So last comment there, people who say recycling is dead, recycling's horrible. I'm with you. I'll even support your ideas. I like to think of all ideas, consider all ideas, but not until there's an alternative can we start saying things like that. Okay, so what are the ramifications of saying recycling is dead? Well, people are going to give up on recycling, and recycling is still a huge industry, and there are some definite environmental benefits that we should not neglect. All right, so that's it for today. I'm also going to be posting a LinkedIn article on this. You can check that out if you want the written format. But those are 7 definitions. Hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. You can take those definitions and now sort of understand the lingo. Sustainability doesn't need to be overly complex. And I thank you for tuning in to the Sustainable Packaging Show.